Welcome along to the Transfer Show, where we start with some breaking news concerning Newcastle's long search for a striker. Rob Dorset, Dharma Sheth are alongside me. We will come to you. What do you know about Jørgen Strand-Larsen?
Well, big breaking news that's literally just come to us in the last few minutes. We know that Newcastle have had an interest in Jørgen Strand-Larsen, of course, for some time now as a possible replacement for one of the two strikers that they're looking to replace, potentially if Alexander Isak leaves for Liverpool, of course. And we've been told in the last few minutes that Newcastle United are expected to make an increased offer to Wolves for him. We expect that offer to be around £60 million, so £5 million more than the latest of their previous two bids, which was rejected at £55 million last night. Interestingly, though, the Wolves boss Vitor Pereira said after that 3-2 win over West Ham in the Carabao Cup last night that every player has a price. Now, of course, people will read a lot into that, but our understanding is that Wolves' position remains he is not for sale. They don't want to sell him in this window, especially bearing in mind that they've got so little time left in the window to try and sort out a replacement and what's been described to us as a Premier League-ready replacement. I mean, that's the point. Strand-Larsen is a key part of the Wolves' side. He's such an important player for them. They can't just buy another young player or take a risk on somebody from perhaps a European club who doesn't know the Premier League and throw him in there and expect him to do a job. It would leave a big hole in the Wolves squad. And so for Newcastle...
Particularly after leaving Cunha.
Well, exactly. And so for Wolves to accept an offer for him at this stage, it's going to have to be a big bid. And the question now is, do Wolves think this £60 million bid, when it goes in, is big enough to try and persuade them? I mean, it would be a good level of profit for them. Bear in mind, he was on loan at Molineux last season from Celta Vigo, and there was an obligation for them to buy him worth £23 million. So Wolves have only just paid £23 million for this player. They could potentially sell him for 60. That sounds like a great bit of business, until you start thinking, well, where are they going to get a replacement from? What does a replacement look like? So just to reiterate that breaking news, we've been told to expect an increased bid from Newcastle, probably at some point today, worth £60 million. That's £5 million more than they made for him yesterday in an offer. That was rejected. The bid hasn't gone in yet, so we don't know how Wolves are going to respond.
Well, I guess the other question about the value of the player, you talked, about it being important because time is ticking away on Wolves to find someone to replace him, but also Wolves will be aware that Alexander Isak, there could be a lot of money coming in for Newcastle, and Wolves could use that to drive up the price should they want to.
And that's all part of the dynamic here. I mean, Darmish has been doing an awful lot of work on the domino effect and how all of these strikers and their futures kind of are intertwined, if you like, at the moment. Yes, Wolves know that Newcastle are potentially going to get a big windfall for Alexander Isak. Already an offer of £110 million turned down. Could that be 120 to come? But Newcastle are being very prudent here. They're not going to overpay for targets, and they're determined not to. You know, they know that Alexander Isak is a unique world talent as a striker, and they suspect that anybody they get in to replace him is not of that calibre yet. They hope that under the brilliant coaching of Eddie Howe, they might be able to improve that in time to come, of course, and improve the value of that player. But they don't want to overpay for these players. Imagine they want two strikers in Newcastle, we know that. Imagine if they paid 60 for Strand-Larsen and then 60 for Wissa at Brentford. They've blown the entire £120 million they might get for Alexander Isak. And do they think they've got a better deal? Do they think they've got two improved players in Strand-Larsen and Wissa compared with Callum Wilson and Alexander Isak? I'd argue they probably don't think that.
The argument here as well is, who is he a replacement for? The messaging has consistently been he might be a replacement for Callum Wilson rather than Alexander Isak. And whether that's being put out there so that the price for Alexander Isak is maintained, because if Liverpool see an Alexander Isak replacement coming in, then they think, well, you've got your replacement, we don't need to pay how much you're valuing Alexander Isak at. But what was interesting that is the Newcastle statement. I keep going back to it. After Alexander Isak made it clear that he felt there were promises that had been broken, Newcastle United said, no promises, we don't know anything about this. But significantly in that statement, they did say that the terms and the conditions of a sale have not been met. Now, as much as people will say, well, Newcastle United is saying Alexander Isak is not for sale, by putting in a statement the terms and conditions were not met, by definition means that there are terms and conditions to sell Alexander Isak. They also went on to say that the conditions of those sales, they don't expect to be met in this transfer window. So you can look at that in two ways. First of all, yes, he's for sale, but the conditions will be, can Liverpool match their valuation alongside, can Newcastle United bring in those replacements? We don't expect the conditions to be met. Is that a message to Liverpool? Well, if you meet those conditions, there's a deal to be done.
Yeah, well, I assume that part of that statement refers to exactly what Vitor Pereira said last night, that every player has his price, even Alexander Isak. If Liverpool get to a certain number, then he would be able to go. You're right on those, what you say about conditions of the deal, being that Newcastle have wanted 2 forwards. He's one of them. Where is Johan Wissa in all of this?
He's continuing to play the waiting game. We've been talking about him the entire window. Newcastle United, we know, want to sign him. Johan Wissa has made it clear that he wants to go to Newcastle United. However, again, we're talking about replacements at Wolves, we're talking about replacements at Newcastle. Brentford will want to bring the replacement if Johan Wissa was to leave the club. Now, publicly, the head coach, Keith Andrews, has consistently said, I like Johan Wissa, I want him to stay, I expect him to stay until after the window closes. However, we do know that Brentford are looking at potential replacements in case the deal for Wissa can be materialised. Now, Brentford have looked at Borussia Dortmund's Maximilian Bayer. Our colleagues in Sky in Germany are saying that one looks a little bit unlikely. But when you look at the Wissa deal, when you look at the Isak deal, the one way I can compare it is when you're in a chain trying to buy a house. And there are like 4 chains involved in all of these deals. If one of those links breaks, you feel that everything else will fall by the wayside. So that's why it's so delicate with 5 days to go, why everyone is just waiting to see if a certain club can get a replacement. Can that open the door and unlock a potential deal for Johan Wissa to go to Newcastle United? But as I mentioned before, it was interesting that Alexander Isak, with 12 days to go, came out with that statement. And it's interesting how Johan Wissa has approached it in this transfer window as well, because those players feel that while the transfer window is open, that is their only opportunity to be able, they feel, to influence a move. Because come 7 o'clock on Monday night, the music stops. And if they haven't got their move, they're stuck.
Just quickly then, give me a number percentage-wise that you think on this time next week that Wissa will still be Brentford and Isak will still be Newcastle.
I genuinely think it's 50-50 still.
I think it's less than that. I'm pretty confident now that Isak is going to have to leave Newcastle and end up at Liverpool. And I think as a result of that, Newcastle will break the bank and make sure they get Wissa as well.
So you think, what, 70-30?
65-35, let's say.
OK, great. Very exact.
Sitting on the fence a little bit.
All right, let's talk Manchester United, because less than 18 months ago, certain 3 players looked to be the future of the club. Now, with 5 days to go until the deadline closes, all 3 of them, Rasmus Hojlund, Alejandro Garnacho and Kobbie Mainoo, could be on their way out. Let's start with Kobbie Mainoo and why his face doesn't seem to fit at the moment.
It's slightly bemusing, and Gary Neville can't understand it. He told us in his podcast, didn't he, after the game at the weekend on Sunday, that he didn't understand why Ruben Amorim is not fancying Kobbie Mainoo, because, of course, he hasn't played a minute on the pitch yet for Manchester United this season. And yet, Rob, you don't have to go back that far to realise that he was probably England's best midfielder, maybe after Declan Rice, at the last Euros. Gareth Southgate discovered him in the latter stages of the tournament, and we thought he was going to be England's mainstay for a while. We assumed he would be Manchester United's mainstay for a while. But Darmish has done a lot of work on this particular story, and I think Manchester United are expecting offers for Kobbie Mainoo. There's growing interest in him from at home and in Europe. And I think that's because Manchester United are giving signals out that we're prepared to do a deal potentially for him. Mainoo is actually supposed to be open to that deal as well. So you suspect that his representatives are being quite busy with a few days in the window yet. Although Mainoo hasn't transmitted that to the club. He hasn't actually told the club that he would want to leave. But as an unused substitute in United's opening 2 Premier League games, you can see why a player of his talent and prospect might be attracting some interest. Crucially, United are happy with Mainoo. They're not actively looking to try and sell him at the moment, we're told. But if a decent offer came in, when he's not part of Ruben Amorim's current plans, you can see that a deal potentially could be done there.
It feels like he's a bit of a victim of circumstance at the moment, because Ruben Amorim has come in, he's changed the formation. So suddenly you've got a situation where Ruben Amorim says he is fighting with Bruno Fernandes to get into the team. So Bruno Fernandes is the captain. He's likely to start. That means Kobbie Mainoo is not going to probably get the game time that he wants. But having said that, the other circumstances probably worked against Kobbie Mainoo here. I know Ruben Amorim has said it may be a benefit that Manchester United haven't got European football this season because he can work with his players. But that means there's a reduced amount of games available for players like Kobbie Mainoo to get some first-team action. It's going to be really interesting to see come, 7:15 this evening when the team sheets are out for Grimsby against Manchester United in the Carabao Cup second round, whether Kobbie Mainoo is in there.
And interestingly as well, just to mention, I mean, the fact that Ruben Amorim is prepared to play Bruno Fernandes out of possession, really, as a number 8, if you like, in the middle of that midfield, where we all know he's a number 10, he plays in a free role, really, but they've brought Matthias Cunha there, who's clearly going to take that role. And Mbeumo as well. It means that it feels like Amorim is crowbarring Bruno Fernandes into the midfield, even though that's not his natural position, because Bruno Fernandes is so important to Manchester United and the club as a whole. And that is costing Kobbie Mainoo right now. And I think he, from the people I'm speaking to, is scratching his head a little bit, saying you'd rather play a player out of position than me. I don't like that.
One of the other things which would be interesting, and I'm assuming you'll be seeing him later this week, is Thomas Tuchel and what he makes of it, which is not one we've got time to get into now, but another subplot with the World Cup around the corner. Let's move on to Rasmus Hojlund. Is he going to join the Premier League old boys at Napoli?
I mean, if everyone has their way, both clubs and Hojlund himself, yes. They're still talking, Napoli and Manchester United, over a deal to take Rasmus Hojlund from Manchester United to Napoli. I was told that 2 other clubs came in with late inquiries, one from the Premier League and one from the Bundesliga. But we think now that Rasmus Hojlund has made his mind up to go to Napoli. He is now just waiting and he's ready to travel to complete that deal once a deal is agreed between Manchester United and Napoli, because that significantly has not been done yet. Napoli wanted to do a loan with an option that would turn into an obligation depending on certain conditions like appearances, goals, Champions League qualification, whereas it's our understanding that Manchester United don't want any conditions involved in this deal. They want a guaranteed obligation inserted into this deal. So that's what they're talking about now. We think the deal is going to be worth around £40 million. That's what Manchester United would want and what they value Hojlund at. And that would be incorporated in within a loan fee plus what the obligation price would be. But just looking at this picture, this was a picture that was filling Manchester United fans not so long ago with so much optimism. This is the future. This is what the future looks like at Manchester United. And by the end of this transfer window, there's a big chance that Rasmus Hojlund, Kobbie Mainoo and Alejandro Garnacho might well be out of Old Trafford, because Manchester United and Chelsea remain in talks over Garnacho, gap in valuation on that one. But there's an expectation that he will end up at Stamford Bridge.
Let's stay with Manchester United goalkeepers.
The man in your picture here is Sana Lemons. He is a Royal Antwerp goalkeeper who was pulled out of the squad on the weekend for their game against Mechelen, and that was a club decision. He actually wanted to play, but they didn't want to risk a move to Manchester United because it felt like at that point it was really close. I'm told today that, yes, they're still in talks. Yes, they're still discussing the structure of a £17.3 million deal, but there is no agreement as yet for Lamens to go to Manchester United. Now, United, for their part, do not want to get involved in any kind of bidding war because there are big reports emerging now that Galatasaray might have offered something more than Manchester United. However, it's still our understanding that Lamens himself wants to go to Old Trafford. There is still a chance that come 7 p.m. on Monday, Manchester United's goalkeeping department will still look like what it does today. Onana, Bayindir and Heaton, and no Lamens, but they're still going for him.
And what about Donnarumma?
Well, Donnarumma, I don't think it's going to be Manchester United because we know that they're going for Lamens at the moment. But as far as Donnarumma is concerned, he hasn't given up hope of a move in the remaining days of this transfer window. As it stands, Manchester City appears to be the most viable option for Gianluigi Donnarumma. That's provided Ederson leaves the Etihad. City, as it stands, their intention is to keep Ederson. There is strong interest from Galatasaray. However, What Manchester City are well aware of is 7 p.m. Monday, September the 1st, the window closes here. 10 days later is when the Turkish window closes. So City are going to try and put themselves in a position where they'll speak to PSG, which they have done. They'll speak to Donnarumma's representatives, which they have done, just to explore the framework of a deal. Because if the Ederson move to Galatasaray starts gathering momentum, but it doesn't get done before the deadline here, City have got a decision to make. Do they press play and go for Donnarumma, knowing that Ederson might leave later on in the window? But then there is every chance, again, like I mentioned with Manchester United, that Ederson will stay put at City. Donnarumma will stay put at PSG, even though he feels in some quarters around his camp that maybe are PSG pricing me out of a move here, because he's only got a year left on his contract. It's clear that they're not going to play him. He's on huge wages. Can they come to an agreement whereby they can make it easier for him to go?
On the subject of goalkeepers, it has been a tough old start for Mads Hermansen at West Ham this season, albeit he's not the only one at West Ham who's found things tough. But might there be another keeper arriving there too?
Well, this is an intriguing one, because we know that West Ham were talking to Botafogo, the Brazilian club, about John Victor before they signed Mads Hermansen. And actually, they pulled out of that deal, and it left a pretty sour taste in the mouth, as far as was made very, very clear to me. They're now back in for him, West Ham. Whether that's as a potential competition for Hermansen or what, we're not quite clear. But it's been made clear to me that Botafogo currently want a much higher fee as part of this deal. It would probably be a loan deal with an obligation to buy, but West Ham are talking about £6 million obligation. Botafogo want much, much higher than that. He's a very highly renowned goalkeeper, Brazilian Player of the Year, not just Brazilian Goalkeeper of the Year, Brazilian Player of the Year. He's got interest from elsewhere. One of only two goalkeepers to keep a clean sheet against PSG last season. The other one was Alisson, by the way. So he's very highly thought of. He won't move on the cheap. Botafogo won't let him go on the cheap. A loan with an obligation could happen, but at what level that obligation fee has is probably the crucial factor right now.
Gents, thank you very much indeed for the moment. More transfers to come. At the same time, at the moment, Keegan Bradley is making his picks for the US Ryder Cup team next month. He has made 4 of his 6 picks so far. They are Justin Thomas, as expected, Colin Morikawa, as expected, and then a couple of rookies, Cam Young and Ben Griffin, have also been named by Keegan Bradley. So 2 more picks to come. Will Keegan Bradley pick himself? We will discover that in the next few minutes. We are back shortly. Welcome back. We now know all 6 of Keegan Bradley's picks for the US Ryder Cup team, and he has not picked himself. So the final 2 that were called up by Keegan Bradley this afternoon, Patrick Cantlay and Sam Burns, selected alongside Ben Griffin, Cam Young, Colin Morikawa and Justin Thomas. So just to reiterate, the captain will not be playing himself. Jamie will be with us at 4:30 for much more analysis on that US Ryder Cup team that does not include their captain, Keegan Bradley. Let's return to the transfers. By the way, Monday we will confirm the 6 picks from Luke Donald. Doesn't look as though Darmish is going to get one of the 6 selections there, despite his
close
qualities on the golf course.
Scowling face.
You're going to have to stick with being a reporter and tell us about Arsenal's search for another defender.
Yeah, I mean, they got their 7th signing of the summer in Eberiche Eze, and we then thought, right, focus is on sales. But they are still wanting to recruit in this transfer window. They remain in talks with Bayer Leverkusen over the signing of the Ecuador international defender Piero Hincapié. Discussions are over a fee and the structure of a deal. Now, look, Hincapié has actually got a release clause in his contract, £52 million, but we think Arsenal would want to negotiate on that release clause. Now, the Bayer Leverkusen director of sport, Simon Rolfs, he's actually been speaking about Hincapié. He says Leverkusen do not want to let him go, and we have yet to receive an official offer, which we shouldn't be surprised about because they're still in discussions before Arsenal will then make their move. But with just 5 days to go, I mentioned those sales. I think this all linked to what Arsenal want to do with their squad, with potential players leaving. Jakub Kiwior is one that is edging ever closer to Porto. We think that deal is worth around £26 million all in, which includes a loan fee and an obligation price. It could go even higher than that, depending on how he performs and how Porto perform as well. So I think at the moment, Arsenal not done incomings or outgoings.
Does outgoings include Reece Nelson?
Yes, it does. I think they're listening to suitable offers for him. We've been speaking throughout this transfer window that it was Fulham who were at the forefront of those talks. They had him on loan, remember, for the entire season last season, but he got an injury, didn't he? Halfway through that season, didn't play since the start of December. They've gone back in for him in this transfer window. However, they look like they are focusing on alternative targets, and it's now Crystal Palace who look like they're in pole position to sign Reece Nelson. They are in talks with Arsenal over a permanent deal. We think the fee under discussion is around £15 million. He's entered the final 2 years of his contract, hasn't featured at all in the opening 2 Premier League games, so one to keep an eye on in the last few days.
Let's just finish with Fulham, Rob, because Marco Silva didn't seem a very happy bunny last week when he spoke about the lack of activity. Is that going to change?
It's been a quiet window for them, and of course they had an interest in Reece Nelson, didn't they? We know that they're in the market for a winger, and it's my understanding that they want a left winger and a right winger if they can before the window closes. And they believe they're making progress towards an agreement for Shakhtar's Kevin. Still plenty of work to do on that deal. I'm told that there's still a bit of a distance apart in terms of the valuation of the player, but Fulham are pushing very hard for him. When it comes to a right winger, they've got a few options. Samuel Chukwueze, Raheem Sterling and Reece Nelson was one of them. That's now fallen by the wayside, it looks like. They're behind the running on that one, but they're looking for a right winger as well. And of course, they could well be in the market for a midfielder because we expect Andreas Pereira to join Palmeiras. Probably on loan, that deal looks like it's happening, but he's not part of the plans at Craven Cottage, so he could be moving on as well. So it could be, after a pretty quiet window, certainly Marco Silva will hope, a busy end to the window for Fulham.
Chaps, thank you very much indeed. A quick reminder that the Transfer Show is back at 7 o'clock this evening, so plenty more from these two. And in the meantime, lots of analysis on the US Ryder Cup team. 6 picks made by the captain, Keegan Bradley. But the man himself is not one of them for New York next month.